The road stretched endlessly before him, a dark ribbon swallowed by fog. Alone and exhausted, the traveler gripped the wheel tighter, his heart quickening with each mile. Something felt wrong here. The GPS was frozen, the silence thick and suffocating. He tried to shake the unease, but the isolation weighed on him, the endless stretch of road mocking him with its emptiness. A sudden thud from outside broke the quiet, sending a jolt of tension through him. As he pressed on, the fog grew denser, the road more treacherous, as if the very land itself was shifting beneath him. Then, out of nowhere, an eerie sign appeared, a town, forgotten by time. But something was waiting. The road ahead seemed endless, an asphalt ribbon stretching out into the night like a serpent that wound through the oppressive darkness. A lone car hummed steadily along the empty highway, its headlights casting sharp beams that cut through the thick veil of fog creeping in from the edges of the road. The driver, a weary traveler far from home, gripped the wheel tightly, his knuckles white with tension. There was something about this road, something off. He could feel it in the pit of his stomach, an unsettling sensation gnawing at him as the miles seemed to stretch on with no end in sight. It was well past midnight, the hour when most people would be safely tucked in their beds, but here he was, alone in the dark, barreling down a remote stretch of highway. The hum of the tires on the asphalt was the only sound, punctuated by the occasional soft rattle of the car's frame. The interior was dim, the soft glow of the dashboard lights casting eerie shadows across the seat, and the air inside felt stale, like the air in a room that hasn't been opened for years. His tired eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, but all he could see was the same thick fog pressing in on either side, swallowing up the road behind him. He hadn't planned on driving so late. His eyes were heavy, and his mind was foggy, but there was something strange about this part of the country. The roads were deserted, stretching for miles with no sign of life. No gas stations, no streetlights, nothing but the occasional crooked signpost and the distant silhouette of trees, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. It felt like the world was holding its breath. A glance at the GPS confirmed his growing suspicion. It wasn't just the fog that seemed to distort the landscape, it was the road itself. The GPS had been acting strangely for the past half hour. At first, it was subtle, small delays in updating the map, slight glitches in the screen. But now, the screen was frozen, the little blue dot that represented his car's location stubbornly stuck in the middle of nowhere. He pulled over to the side of the road and hit the power button, trying to reset it, but the device remained dead. He let out a sigh of frustration, running a hand through his hair. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. A quick road trip through a scenic part of the country had turned into something much more unsettling. Something about this place didn't sit right with him. It was like a pressure in the air, silent, but thick. The kind of feeling you get when you're being watched, but when you turn around, there's no one there. He shook his head, trying to shake off the unease, but the feeling lingered like a shadow at the edges of his thoughts. The silence was suddenly broken by a sharp thud, a noise coming from somewhere outside the car. His body tensed instinctively, eyes darting to the side mirror. Nothing. Only the trees and the endless stretch of road. The thud was followed by a distant rustling sound, like something heavy brushing against the underbrush. His pulse quickened. He told himself it was nothing, just an animal, maybe a deer or some other nocturnal creature. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't. He started the car again and slowly pulled back onto the road. The fog had grown thicker, swirling around the car like an ocean mist. The headlights barely pierced the wall of gray before them. He had to squint to see where he was going. The road was becoming more twisted now, the turns sharper, the curves tighter. The trees on either side of him grew denser, their branches forming dark canopies above, blocking out the little light that the headlights offered. The sense of isolation was suffocating. Another hour passed, or maybe more, he couldn't tell. Time had become meaningless out here. There was no sense of direction, no sense of purpose to the road. It was as though the world around him had fallen away, leaving only him and this endless stretch of highway. He glanced again at the GPS, but it remained lifeless, the screen a frozen void. His phone, too, had no signal, nothing but static when he tried calling for help. That was when he saw it, an old, weathered sign that appeared out of nowhere, It seemed to have been forgotten by time itself, its surface cracked and peeling. The words were barely legible, but he could make out a few letters. The name of a town. The town he was headed toward, according to the map. But why hadn't he seen it earlier? He thought back to the signs he'd passed, the ones that had promised a town up ahead, promised civilization. But he hadn't seen anything remotely close to a town in what felt like forever. It was as if he had been driving through some otherworldly void, where time and place didn't follow their usual rules. The hairs on the back of his neck prickled. He decided to stop. Maybe this town would have a motel, a place to rest, and a working phone. Maybe the oddity of the road was nothing more than exhaustion playing tricks on his mind. As he slowed to a stop, he couldn't help but notice how quiet it was, unnervingly quiet. The car's engine sputtered and died, and for a moment, he sat there in complete stillness, staring at the sign that read, "Welcome to Black Hollow." The sign swayed slightly in the breeze, but there was no sound. Not even the rustling of the trees. He opened his door and stepped out of the car, the cool night air hitting him like a slap to the face. The scent of wet earth and decaying leaves filled his nostrils. The town ahead was shrouded in darkness. The lights of the buildings, if there were any, were all turned off. Not a single light glowed from the windows. Not a single car moved. It was like stepping into a ghost town, a place that had been forgotten, abandoned. The silence felt heavy, like a curtain had fallen over everything, muting the world. His footsteps echoed on the cracked pavement as he walked toward the first building he saw, a small, decrepit motel. The sign above it hung crookedly, one half of the letters missing. The place looked like it had been out of business for years, but there was no harm in checking, he thought. He approached the door and tried the handle. But a cold shiver ran down his spine as he peered through the glass. Inside it was dark. The only movement was the faint flickering of the neon vacancy sign in the window, casting an eerie glow onto the empty parking lot. But there was something wrong. He felt it in the pit of his stomach, the same feeling he had earlier when he thought he was being watched. Something was watching him now. He turned back toward the road, his breath catching in his throat. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. Something, or someone, was standing at the edge of the parking lot, just outside the reach of his headlights. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light, a shadow cast by the trees. But no, it was a figure, tall and still, watching, waiting. He couldn't move. The figure didn't move either. And in that moment he realized there was no one else here. Not a soul. Except for him. The figure took a slow step forward. Then another. The ground beneath him seemed to tremble as the world around him seemed to narrow into the figure's unblinking gaze. And then, the soft, almost imperceptible sound of footsteps on the gravel grew louder. Closer. And closer. The car's engine sputtered to life with an agonizing groan, sending a shiver down the driver's spine. He slammed the gear into drive and pressed the accelerator, but the vehicle responded sluggishly, like it, too, was reluctant to move forward. The headlights illuminated the dark, fog-heavy road ahead, but it was as though they could hardly pierce the thick veil of gray swirling around them. His heart beat faster as he gripped the steering wheel with both hands, his knuckles tightening until they turned white. The eerie quiet had returned, broken only by the low hum of the car and the occasional creak of the suspension. As he drove, the oppressive atmosphere seemed to press in on him from all sides, wrapping the car in a suffocating grip. Every road sign he passed seemed to mock him. He couldn't read any of them properly, the letters faded or obscured by time and neglect. It was as if the world itself had forgotten about this place. Every time he glanced in the rearview mirror, he saw nothing but an endless stretch of road, the fog swallowing up anything that dared enter its depths. The isolation was unbearable. There was no sign of life, no other vehicles, no distant lights on the horizon. Just the road. Just the fog. And just him. The silence felt like a living, breathing entity, something he couldn't escape no matter how fast he drove, no matter how far he went. His foot pressed harder on the gas pedal, but the road ahead seemed to stretch endlessly, a snake of asphalt winding through the wilderness. His eyes grew heavier, eyelids fluttering as exhaustion began to claw at him. The thought of pulling over and resting briefly crossed his mind, but a sickening dread filled his chest at the idea. He glanced at the clock. It had been hours since he last passed any sign of civilization. The thought of staying in this forsaken place, even for a moment, made his skin crawl. Still, his fatigue was undeniable. His body ached for rest. But he couldn't stop. Not here. Not on this road. And then, just as he thought he couldn't take another mile, the road ahead seemed to shift in the darkness. A glimmer of light, dim and flickering, appeared on the horizon. At first, he thought it might be a hallucination, his mind playing tricks on him, but as he drew closer, the light grew stronger. It wasn't much, a weak street lamp casting a ghostly glow on the road, but it was enough. Enough to break the suffocating grip of the dark, if only for a moment. He let out a sigh of relief and pressed harder on the gas pedal, the sound of the tires against the asphalt filling the car's interior. Maybe this was the sign of something better ahead, something that would break this madness. Maybe there was a town nearby, or at least a place to stop. He needed to rest, to clear his head, to get his bearings. But as the light grew nearer, something shifted again. The air became colder, sharper. The fog thickened, wrapping around the car like tendrils of some unseen creature. The light ahead flickered again, but it didn't seem to get any closer. It wasn't a street lamp after all. It was a sign. An old, worn-out sign hanging at the entrance of a forgotten gas station. The sign swayed gently in the breeze, its neon letters barely visible in the dim light. The gas station was closed, its windows dark, its pumps long since abandoned. The car slowed as he approached the dilapidated station. It was the kind of place that had been left behind by time, a relic of a bygone era. The structure was run down, its walls cracked, the roof sagging under the weight of years of neglect. A single, lonely light buzzed above the entrance, casting long, jagged shadows across the cracked concrete floor. The air inside the car grew colder still, as if the temperature had dropped several degrees in an instant. For a moment he debated driving on. The road had become even more desolate, more oppressive, but the thought of leaving the safety of the car, even for a few minutes, made his skin crawl. He couldn't stay here, he couldn't. And yet, something about the place called to him. It was as though the station were a silent observer, watching, waiting. He parked the car just outside the entrance, unsure of what to do next. The engine turned off with a soft whine, and the car fell into an eerie silence. For a few moments, he just sat there, staring at the abandoned building. The shadows seemed to stretch toward him, pulling him in. The wind picked up, carrying with it the faintest whisper, something he couldn't quite make out. His fingers clenched around the door handle, his body frozen in place, but the desire for a break, however fleeting, won out. He opened the door and stepped out into the cold, his boots crunching against the gravel. The air hit him like a slap, biting into his skin. His breath formed visible clouds in the chilly night. He made his way to the entrance of the gas station, glancing around nervously. The feeling of being watched hadn't dissipated. If anything, it was stronger now, pressing in on him from all sides. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end as he stepped closer to the building. There was no sound, no movement, just the oppressive quiet of the night. His footsteps echoed on the cracked pavement, each one sounding louder than the last, as though they were being amplified by the emptiness around him. The faintest scrape of metal against stone echoed in the distance, too soft to make out, but it was enough to stop him dead in his tracks. He held his breath and listened. Nothing. He forced himself to continue, pushing open the door with a creak that seemed to resonate in the stillness. Inside, the air was stale, thick with the scent of rust and decay. The faint hum of a ceiling fan swirled above him, moving the air just slightly, as if to mock him. He stepped inside, scanning the room. It was empty, save for a few dusty shelves and an old cash register that had long since stopped working. But there was something unsettling about the place, a strange energy that hung in the air, thick and suffocating. The faintest noise made him turn his head. At the far end of the room, a door that led to the back of the building creaked open just a fraction, as if beckoning him to step forward. His heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, he stood frozen, staring at the small sliver of darkness beyond the door. He could feel something, someone, behind that door, waiting, watching. The instinct to run surged within him, but his legs felt heavy, like they were made of stone. The door creaked open wider. And then, a figure stepped into the doorway. It was just a shadow at first, but as it moved closer, the outline became more distinct. A figure, tall and thin, with dark, hollow eyes that seemed to pierce through him. The figure stepped forward into the dim light, and the air around him seemed to grow colder still. His breath caught in his throat. He couldn't move. He couldn't speak. The figure didn't move, didn't blink. It simply stared, and then it smiled. A cold, hollow smile, devoid of warmth or recognition. It was the kind of smile that sent a chill deep into the marrow of his bones. The room seemed to grow darker as the figure took another step forward, and the door behind him closed with a soft click, trapping him inside. The walls seemed to close in around him as the darkness pressed in tighter, suffocating him. The figure's smile grew wider, impossibly so, and the air seemed to thicken as it took another slow step toward him. Every instinct told him to run, to flee, but he couldn't. His legs refused to move. The figure raised a hand, a long, bony finger pointing directly at him, its finger crooked in a gesture that was both unnatural and wrong. The smile widened, revealing teeth far too sharp, far too long. The temperature in the room dropped even further, and he could feel the very life draining from him, as if the figure was sucking the warmth from his body. "You're lost," the figure whispered, its voice cold and hollow. The words seemed to resonate inside his chest, reverberating through his bones. "And now you're mine." The air grew still, so still that it was almost suffocating. The sound of his heartbeat was the only thing he could hear now, thudding in his ears. His body was frozen in terror, his mind racing with thoughts of escape, any escape, but his body wouldn't respond. And as the figure took another step forward, a low, guttural laugh escaped from its lips. The last thing he saw before the darkness enveloped him was its eyes, black as the void, and filled with something far worse than fear. The sound of the wind howling through the trees was the only noise that dared to break the silence. His breath came in sharp, panicked gasps, echoing in his ears as he stumbled away from the gas station. The world around him was a blur, an endless expanse of black sky and shadowed trees stretching out in every direction. His mind was racing, adrenaline coursing through his veins, yet his body felt like it was moving through thick mud, each step slow and heavy. He didn't know where he was going or what he was running from, but the only thing that mattered was getting away from that place, the place where time seemed to stand still, where the air was too cold, and where the figure that had smiled at him so unnaturally lingered in his thoughts like a nightmare he couldn't escape. His eyes darted to the horizon, searching for any sign of life, any hint of civilization, but the darkness pressed in tighter, suffocating him with each passing second. The headlights of his car were still there, illuminating the empty road in front of him, but the mere thought of returning to it was enough to send a fresh wave of panic through his chest. He couldn't go back. Not after what he had seen. He felt trapped, stuck in a place that didn't exist, with no clear way out. The fog had thickened again, swirling around his feet like a blanket of death, and he couldn't tell whether it was the air growing colder or if it was just the creeping sensation of dread settling over him like a second skin. He glanced behind him, half expecting to see the figure following him, but there was nothing. Just the faint outline of the gas station, now swallowed by the fog. But even the thought of looking back made his skin crawl. He forced himself to keep moving forward, his feet dragging through the gravel, each step feeling like a struggle against an invisible force that wanted to pull him back into the darkness. Every sense in his body was heightened, attuned to the slightest sound, the smallest movement. His skin prickled with the feeling of being watched, even though he saw nothing but the dense mist swirling around him. It was as if the trees themselves were alive, their gnarled branches twisting and creaking in the wind, beckoning him into their depths. He wanted to scream, to shout out in frustration, but the sounds seemed to get swallowed up by the oppressive quiet of the night. Even the wind had gone still, leaving only the hollow sound of his breathing and the soft crunch of his boots on the ground. He had no idea how far he had walked, how much time had passed since he left the gas station, but he knew one thing for sure: he had to keep going. The fog seemed to distort the world around him, stretching the road ahead into a surreal, otherworldly landscape. Shapes flickered in the corners of his vision, things that didn't belong in the real world. Figures that weren't quite human, shadowy forms that seemed to float in and out of view, too fleeting to be grasped. His heart raced, his mind spiraling as the world around him seemed to shift and warp, becoming something unfamiliar, something threatening. He blinked rapidly, trying to clear his vision, but the shapes remained. They weren't real. They couldn't be real. But the more he looked, the more the line between reality and nightmare seemed to blur. He heard it again. A rustling sound, faint at first, but growing louder with each passing second. It came from the trees, just beyond his reach, too far to see clearly, but close enough to make his blood run cold. He stopped dead in his tracks, straining to listen. The sound was deliberate now, rhythmic, like something, or someone, moving through the underbrush. His stomach twisted into a knot, and his instincts screamed at him to run, to flee in the opposite direction, but his legs refused to obey. The rustling grew louder, closer, until it felt like it was right behind him. Every nerve in his body was on high alert, his entire being frozen in terror. He didn't dare turn around, didn't want to see whatever was lurking behind him. But he couldn't keep walking forward, either. He was trapped. Trapped between the fear of the unknown and the terror of what might be just out of sight. And then the noise stopped. For a moment, there was nothing, just the eerie, oppressive silence that surrounded him. He didn't dare breathe, didn't dare move. He could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his chest, the rush of blood in his ears, drowning out everything else. The tension in the air was suffocating, thick with the promise of something terrible waiting to unfold. It felt as though the very world had paused, holding its breath in anticipation. He took a slow step back, his eyes scanning the trees nervously, every muscle in his body coiled, ready to spring at a moment's notice. But still, there was nothing. No sound. No movement. Just the cold, lifeless night. And then a soft voice, a whisper, floated on the wind. It was faint at first, barely audible, like a breath carried on the breeze, but it grew louder, clearer, as though someone was standing right beside him, whispering in his ear. The words were indistinct, lost in the wind, but the tone was unmistakable. It was soothing, yet chilling, like a lullaby sung by a voice that belonged to something not of this world. His breath caught in his throat, and a shiver ran down his spine. The voice was so familiar, yet so foreign, like something that had been buried deep within his mind, a memory he couldn't quite place. His heart pounded in his chest as the voice spoke again, this time clearer than before, each word like a thread pulling him deeper into the nightmare. "Come closer." The words were soft, coaxing, almost tender. They didn't belong here. They didn't belong to the world he knew. And yet, as they echoed in his mind, they seemed to seep into his very soul, wrapping around him like a suffocating grip. He tried to turn away, to move, but his feet felt like they were stuck in place, glued to the ground. The voice called to him again, and this time, it wasn't just a whisper. It was a command, clear, demanding, irresistible. "Come closer." His heart raced as the words settled into his bones, a compulsion that he couldn't shake. It wasn't just the voice, it was the feeling behind it, the overwhelming sense that something wanted him. That something was waiting for him, just beyond his reach, in the thick fog and the dark, twisted trees. His mind screamed at him to run, to turn around and go back, but his body refused to move. He was rooted to the spot, as though some invisible force had wrapped its tendrils around him, pulling him closer to whatever waited in the shadows. And then the ground beneath him shifted. It was subtle at first, just a slight tremor that rippled through the earth, but it quickly intensified, the ground vibrating beneath his feet. The trees around him began to sway, their branches creaking like the bones of some ancient creature awakening from a long slumber. The rustling sound returned, this time louder, more frantic, as though something was moving toward him, fast. His breath hitched in his throat as he strained to see through the fog, but the world remained a blur of gray. The pressure in the air was suffocating, pressing in on him from all sides, and the voice, sweet and insistent, called again. "Come closer." It was a command now, unyielding and unrelenting. The ground trembled beneath his feet, the trees groaning as they twisted and contorted, their shadows stretching like fingers reaching for him. His mind was unraveling, his sense of reality slipping further and further away. He was no longer sure where the fog ended and where the darkness began. His body felt like it wasn't his own, his movements slow and deliberate, as if someone or something was controlling him. He had to fight it. He had to get away. But the voice was too powerful. Come closer. It was no longer a choice. The wind had picked up again, howling through the trees in a shrill, unnatural way that sent a chill crawling down his spine. The ground beneath his feet felt uneven, as if it were shifting beneath his weight, threatening to swallow him whole. His heart pounded loudly in his ears, drowning out everything except for the overwhelming sense of dread that gripped him. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and decay, and each breath he took felt like he was inhaling the very essence of this forsaken place. His feet moved, though not under his control, as though some invisible force was guiding him deeper into the fog, deeper into the darkness. He tried to stop, to fight back against the overwhelming compulsion, but his legs refused to obey him. He was walking as if on autopilot, dragged toward something he couldn't understand, something that was calling to him with an irresistible pull. As the fog thickened, the world around him began to blur into an indistinguishable haze. The once familiar path had dissolved into nothingness, and now there was only an empty void stretching out in all directions. The trees seemed to stretch taller and taller, their gnarled branches twisting like skeletal fingers reaching out to ensnare him. The farther he walked, the darker it became, as though the very air was absorbing all the light, suffocating it until there was nothing left. He couldn't remember how long he had been walking. Time had lost all meaning here. It felt as though he was trapped in a perpetual night, with no end in sight. Suddenly, a noise broke through the silence. A low, guttural growl that seemed to reverberate through the very earth beneath him. His breath caught in his throat as his eyes frantically searched the darkness, but he saw nothing. The growl came again, closer this time, and his body tensed, every nerve on high alert. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up, and his instincts screamed at him to run, but his legs were like stone, frozen in place. It wasn't just the growl. It was the feeling that something was approaching, something big, something dangerous. He could feel the ground beneath him shift again, this time with more force, as though something large was moving toward him through the fog. His body trembled with fear, and he wanted to scream, but the sound seemed to get trapped in his throat, unable to escape. Then, through the dense fog, he saw it, a pair of glowing eyes, hovering just above the ground, like two amber orbs suspended in the air. They were unblinking, fixed on him with an intensity that sent a jolt of cold fear through his chest. The eyes did not move, did not blink, but they seemed to be watching him, studying him. His heart raced, and he could feel the sweat beginning to form on his brow, despite the cold that surrounded him. He wanted to look away, to turn and run, but his gaze was locked on those eyes, as though some invisible force was holding him in place. The air grew colder still, and the growl came again, louder this time, like it was right behind him. He could feel the weight of it pressing against his back, could almost feel the hot breath of whatever creature was lurking in the fog. The eyes moved, slowly, deliberately, and he realized that whatever was behind them was getting closer, stepping through the fog with a deliberate grace. His pulse quickened, his breathing shallow, and panic surged within him. What was it? What kind of creature could move through the fog like that, so silently, so quickly? His mind raced through every possible explanation, but none of them seemed to make sense. The growl came again, and this time he could feel the ground vibrating beneath him. It was close, too close. The fog shifted as the figure moved forward, revealing a shape, something dark and towering, its form barely visible in the dim light of the distant, flickering moon. He tried to move, tried to step back, but his feet wouldn't respond. He was rooted to the spot, his body paralyzed by fear. He could only watch as the creature stepped into view, its glowing eyes now the only thing he could see, the only thing that mattered. It wasn't like anything he had ever seen before. It was enormous, its body covered in thick, matted fur that blended seamlessly with the darkness around it. Its limbs were long and slender, far too long for a creature of its size, and they moved with an unnatural fluidity, like something not quite human, yet not quite animal either. The growl came again, but now it was accompanied by a low, rumbling sound that felt like it was coming from deep within the earth. The creature's mouth opened, revealing rows of sharp, jagged teeth that glistened in the faint moonlight, and a scent of decay and rotting flesh wafted toward him, nearly making him gag. Its eyes never left his, and as it took another step forward, the air around them seemed to grow even colder, the fog thickening, swirling in unnatural patterns around the creature's massive form. His body reacted without thought. A surge of adrenaline coursed through his veins, and for the first time since this nightmare had started, his legs moved, carrying him away from the creature with an almost desperate speed. He didn't know where he was running to, didn't know which direction to go, but he had to move. He had to get away from those eyes, from that thing that was hunting him. But no matter how fast he ran, the creature was always just behind him, its presence looming in the fog like a shadow that couldn't be outrun. His breath came in ragged gasps, and his legs burned with exhaustion, but still he ran, blindly, hoping for an escape, for anything that would break the cycle of fear that had gripped him so tightly. And then, just as he thought he could run no longer, the fog parted ahead of him, revealing a clearing in the woods. It was small, surrounded by trees that looked ancient, their bark twisted and gnarled with age. At the center of the clearing stood a small stone structure, an altar, perhaps, though it was unlike anything he had ever seen. It was old, covered in moss and vines, its surface cracked and weathered by time. He didn't know why, but something about it drew him in. Something deep inside him told him that this was the place to go, that this was where the creature couldn't follow. With no other choice, he sprinted toward the structure, his heart pounding in his chest as the growl behind him grew louder, closer. He reached the altar, his hands trembling as he placed his palms against the cold stone. The moment he touched it, a sharp shock of energy shot through his body, like a bolt of electricity, and he gasped, stumbling back. The fog around him seemed to recoil, swirling away from the structure in a tight circle. For a moment, everything was still. The growl had stopped. The creature had stopped. He didn't know what had just happened, but he could feel the change in the air. The pressure, the oppressive weight of the fog, seemed to lift, if only for a moment. He looked around, desperate for any sign of the creature, but there was nothing. Just the silent trees, the distant howls of wind, and the eerie stillness of the night. He wanted to believe he was safe, that he had found some kind of refuge, but deep down, he knew it was only a temporary reprieve. The creature was still out there, somewhere in the fog, waiting for him to make a mistake. And sooner or later, it would find him again. The stillness of the clearing felt almost unnatural, like a breath held too long, waiting to be exhaled. The weight of the night had not lessened. It was still there, pressing in from all sides, suffocating the air. The altar stood before him, its ancient stone cold and unyielding against the warmth of his trembling hands. He could still feel the shock, the electrical jolt that had surged through his body when he touched it. It was as if the stone had been waiting for him, expecting him to arrive, like it had been calling out to him all along, though he couldn't understand why. His pulse was still racing, and the adrenaline was beginning to ebb, leaving behind a dull ache in his limbs, but he couldn't shake the sense of urgency that lingered in the pit of his stomach. He had to understand what was happening. He had to find a way out of this nightmare. The fog continued to swirl around the clearing, thick and impenetrable. He couldn't see more than a few feet in any direction, but the feeling of being watched hadn't gone away. It was stronger now, more oppressive. Every muscle in his body tensed, as though anticipating something, waiting for the next wave of terror to crash over him. His breath was shallow, and every small sound, a rustling leaf, a snap of a twig, seemed to echo through the air, amplified in the eerie silence. The trees around him towered like dark sentinels, their gnarled branches reaching toward him like skeletal arms. He wasn't alone in this place. He could feel it in the air, the tension that gripped the very earth beneath his feet. He had to make a decision, but his mind was clouded, his thoughts jumbled. Should he stay here, by the altar, or continue running, hoping to escape whatever force was hunting him? The altar had offered a momentary reprieve, But it wasn't a solution. It wasn't an escape. He didn't understand what it was, why it had reacted to him the way it had, but he felt no safer here than he had felt on the road. The creature, whatever it was still out there, still lurking in the fog, waiting for him to make a mistake. And when it found him, when it caught him, it wouldn't be merciful. But the longer he stood there, the more he began to wonder if there was something about the altar he didn't understand, something he hadn't yet noticed. His eyes scanned its surface, tracing the intricate carvings etched into the stone. They were faded, worn by centuries of exposure to the elements, but still visible, twisting, spiraling shapes that seemed to pulse and writhe with an energy of their own, like the very stone was alive. There was something unsettling about them, a pattern that seemed to shift and change the longer he stared. He couldn't decipher them, but they seemed to call out to him, beckoning him to understand, to uncover their meaning. His hand reached out again, hovering just above the surface of the altar, the air thick with the sense that this was a pivotal moment. But before he could touch it, a sudden noise broke through the silence. A low, rumbling growl, too close, too real. His body froze, the sound sending a shock of terror straight to his core. The creature was here. It had found him. His heart pounded in his chest, the sound deafening in his ears. He could feel the hair on the back of his neck stand up, and his skin prickled with cold dread. He didn't dare turn around. He couldn't. His feet felt glued to the ground, and his mind was a blur of panic, every instinct telling him to run, but his body refused to move. The growl came again, closer this time, vibrating through the air like an ominous promise. The fog shifted, swirling in unnatural patterns, and from the depths of it, the creature emerged. Its form was only partially visible at first, a massive silhouette that seemed to blend seamlessly with the darkness of the night. But as it stepped closer, its shape became clearer, enormous, hunched, its features twisted and grotesque. The eyes, those glowing amber orbs, locked onto him with a predatory intensity that sent a jolt of pure terror through his veins. Its mouth opened slowly, revealing rows of jagged teeth, dripping with some kind of foul, viscous liquid that glistened in the dim light. The air around him grew heavier, thick with the stench of decay and death, and he could feel the ground beneath him shift once more, like the very earth was trembling in fear. It stepped closer, each movement slow and deliberate, as if savoring the moment before it pounced. His body was paralyzed, his breath caught in his throat, unable to scream, unable to run. He could feel the fog creeping around him, pressing in tighter, as if the world itself was closing in, suffocating him. The growl grew louder, more guttural, filling the air with a sound that seemed to reverberate through his bones. His hands clenched at his sides, and his legs shook with the effort of staying rooted to the spot. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to flee, but his legs were like lead, his feet unwilling to move. The creature stopped just a few feet away from him, its eyes never leaving his. There was no sound, no movement, just the overwhelming presence of it, looming in the fog, its breath hot and rancid against the cool air. It was watching him, studying him, and in that moment he realized something chilling. The creature wasn't hunting him like prey. It wasn't chasing him out of hunger or anger. It was watching him because it was waiting for something. Waiting for him to make the next move. A low hiss escaped from the creature's throat, a sound so sharp and chilling that it felt like it could cut through his very soul. The fog around him thickened, wrapping around his legs, pulling him down, as if the earth itself was trying to consume him. He couldn't breathe. The air felt too thick, too heavy, and his chest tightened with every passing second. He was running out of time. The creature was too close now, its shadow stretching across the ground, engulfing him. And still it didn't move. It didn't attack. It simply stood there, waiting. He tried to move, tried to push through the terror that gripped him, but his legs wouldn't respond. His mind screamed for him to run, but his body refused to obey. The fog around him was getting thicker, the temperature dropping with each passing second. His breath came in shallow gasps, and the creature's eyes seemed to glow brighter, its unblinking gaze drilling into him, as though it were reading his every thought, his every fear. It knew. It knew everything. The air seemed to crackle with energy, the tension between them building to a breaking point. His hands trembled at his sides, his heart racing in his chest, but he couldn't stop looking at those eyes. Those eyes that seemed to hold the weight of 1,000 lifetimes, 1,000 secrets. He could feel it deep in his bones. The creature was waiting for him to make a decision. To acknowledge whatever dark purpose had brought him to this forsaken place. And then, just as he thought he couldn't take it anymore, the creature moved. It was a blur of motion, too fast, too sudden. Its massive form lunged at him, its jaws opening wide, and in that moment he thought his life was over. But just before it could reach him, a sudden burst of energy surged through the clearing. The ground beneath his feet shuddered, and a deafening crack split the air. The creature screeched, a high-pitched, animalistic sound that rattled his very bones. The fog recoiled, retreating from the altar, pulling back like a tide receding from the shore. The creature faltered, stepping back, its glowing eyes filled with confusion and rage. It howled again, but the sound was different now, frantic, desperate. The force that had gripped the air shifted, and the creature stumbled back further, as if something were pushing it away. It was retreating. It was being forced back into the fog, into the shadows where it had come from. For a moment, everything stood still. The fog swirled around the clearing, but the creature was gone. And the silence returned, only this time, it wasn't oppressive. It wasn't suffocating. It was the kind of silence that comes after a storm, after the chaos has passed, leaving behind a haunting calm. He stood there, breathing heavily, his mind racing, unsure of what had just happened, unsure if he had truly escaped or if this was just another twisted game of the forces at play in this place. But whatever had happened, whatever had caused the creature to retreat, it had bought him time. And for now, that was all he had. Time to figure out what was really happening and how he could survive it. Time to understand what was calling him to this place and how he could finally escape. The quiet after the creature's retreat was unsettling. The fog, once thick and oppressive, seemed to have dissipated almost entirely, leaving the air oddly still. But it wasn't a peaceful stillness. It was hollow, like the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for something else to happen. He stood motionless in the clearing, his heart still pounding in his chest, every nerve alert, every muscle tensed. The dark silhouette of the creature was gone, but its presence lingered in the air, like a shadow that wouldn't leave. The weight of the moment hung heavily over him, and though he could feel the chill of the night creeping into his bones, it wasn't the cold that held him in place. It was something deeper, something far more unsettling. His breath was slow, steadying, but his mind was racing. He couldn't understand what had just happened. One moment he had been facing the creature, certain that it was about to end his life, and the next, it had been pushed back by some invisible force. The altar. Was it the altar that had done it? The surge of energy he had felt when his hands had touched the stone still reverberated through his fingertips, like static, tingling beneath his skin. But how? What was that energy? What was this place? He looked around the clearing again, but now the shadows seemed deeper, darker, the trees looming over him like sentinels, their twisted branches reaching out with a new kind of menace. The path behind him, the road that had led him to this place, was nowhere to be seen, swallowed up by the mist and the dark. He took a cautious step toward the altar, his body still trembling from the adrenaline, but something inside him told him that he needed answers. He needed to understand what was happening, why he was here, why this place felt so wrong. The carvings on the stone pulsed faintly in the dim light, like they were alive, shifting and twisting in a way that no mere stone should. They seemed to beckon him, urging him to touch them again, to discover the secret they held. But the last time he had touched the altar, he had felt that surge of energy, unnatural, sharp, as though the stone itself had been waiting for him to come. He didn't know if he was ready to feel it again, but the compulsion was strong, too strong to ignore. He needed to know what was happening. The ground beneath him shifted again, a tremor, subtle at first, then growing stronger. His legs were still shaky, his body weak from the strain of the past few hours, but his feet moved instinctively toward the altar. The closer he got, the stronger the pull became, like a magnetic force drawing him in. It was as if the stone was alive, as if it had a heartbeat, and it was calling him closer. He reached out tentatively, his fingers brushing against the surface of the altar, And this time, the jolt of energy that shot through his body was more intense, more powerful. The air around him seemed to crackle with static, and the ground beneath him vibrated with an unsettling hum. He pulled his hand back immediately, but the sensation lingered, a prickling sensation on his skin, like the aftermath of a lightning strike. As his hand retreated, the ground shook again, this time more violently, and he staggered back. His heart skipped a beat. The trees around the clearing groaned, their branches swaying violently, as if caught in a sudden gust of wind. But there was no wind. The fog swirled in a wild, chaotic dance, and the temperature dropped even further, the air growing thick with the scent of damp earth and something far more sinister. His breath clouded in front of him, visible in the cold, as he looked around frantically, searching for a sign of what was coming. The ground beneath him rumbled again, this time with a deep, resonating growl, a sound that seemed to emanate from the very heart of the earth itself. The trees creaked and cracked, their twisted forms stretching out like dark fingers clawing at the sky. And then, in the distance, he saw it. A flicker of movement, just beyond the edge of the clearing. At first, he thought it was a trick of the fog, but then it moved again, unmistakable. Someone, was out there, hidden in the darkness, just beyond the trees. His breath hitched in his chest, his heartbeat quickening again, and he instinctively took a step back. The sense of being watched returned, stronger than before, like a pressure on his chest, suffocating him. He couldn't make out any details yet, but the shape was large, shifting in and out of the fog, like something stalking him, moving slowly but with purpose. His instincts screamed at him to run, to flee, but the terror kept his feet rooted to the ground. It was the same feeling he had gotten when he had first seen the creature, an overwhelming sense that he was not alone, that something terrible was about to happen. And yet, he couldn't tear his eyes away from the figure in the distance, the shape that was drawing closer with each passing second. As the figure stepped into the dim light of the clearing, he saw it more clearly. It wasn't human, but it wasn't the creature from before either. It was something else entirely, tall, its form draped in dark, flowing robes that seemed to merge with the shadows around it. Its face was hidden beneath a hood, a shadow obscuring its features, but the air around it felt charged, electric, like a storm waiting to break. He could feel the pressure in the air intensify as the figure moved closer, each step slow and deliberate. The ground beneath him seemed to tremble with each movement, and the very atmosphere seemed to thicken, as though something ancient and powerful was awakening. The figure stopped just beyond the altar, its presence looming over him like a dark cloud. It didn't speak, didn't make a sound, but the energy it radiated was palpable, suffocating. It felt like the air itself was pressing in on him, the weight of the silence hanging heavy between them. His mouth went dry, his throat tight, and his heart hammered in his chest. He couldn't move. He couldn't speak. There was something about this figure, something that felt both wrong and familiar, as though it were a part of this place, a part of whatever force was at work here. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The figure stood motionless, its hooded head tilted slightly, as though observing him, studying him. The silence stretched on, unbearable, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. And then, just as he thought he couldn't take it anymore, the figure raised one long, pale hand, its fingers elongated and graceful. It reached toward the altar, its movements slow, deliberate, as though it were making an offering. But then it paused. The air around them grew colder still, and a sharp, almost imperceptible sound echoed through the clearing, like a whisper, barely audible but unmistakable. "You shouldn't have come here." The voice was soft, almost a breath, but the weight of it was crushing. It carried with it a sense of finality, as if this was the moment, the point of no return. His blood ran cold, and he took an involuntary step back, his body reacting before his mind could process the words. The figure's hand dropped to its side, and the silence returned, but now it was different. Now it felt like the calm before the storm, the quiet that comes before something catastrophic. The figure didn't move, didn't speak again, but the world around them began to shift once more. The fog swirled around them, and the trees groaned and creaked as though the very earth was alive, twisting in pain. His pulse quickened. What had it meant by that? What had it meant by, "You shouldn't have come here"? And what was this place, really? What kind of power had brought him here, and why was he so connected to it? Before he could answer those questions, before he could make any sense of what was happening, the figure turned and began to walk away, its dark robes flowing behind it like smoke in the wind. He didn't know if he should follow, if it was safe to approach, but something about the way it moved, so effortlessly, so gracefully, compelled him to step forward. He wasn't sure why, but he knew one thing for certain: this was not over. This was just the beginning. And whatever lay ahead, he couldn't stop now. He had come too far. The figure moved through the fog with an almost otherworldly grace, its dark robes flowing like shadows in the night. Each step it took was deliberate, measured, as if it had all the time in the world, while he stood frozen in place, watching it disappear into the mist. The air around him felt heavier with every passing second, the sense of dread growing more intense, wrapping around his chest like a vice. He didn't know why, but something inside him urged him to follow. He didn't understand it, didn't understand why he felt the need to approach this figure, this being, but it was undeniable. There was a pull, a gravitational force, drawing him forward. But was it curiosity? Or something more sinister? He took a tentative step forward, his feet sinking slightly into the soft earth beneath him. The ground seemed to shift beneath his weight, as if the very land was alive, responding to his movement. The fog seemed to part in front of him, as if it were guiding him in the figure's direction. His mind was a swirl of confusion and fear, but the overwhelming urge to follow persisted. He took another step, then another, his heart pounding louder with each movement. The distance between him and the figure closed slowly, but every step felt like an eternity, as though the world was conspiring to keep him away. His eyes never left the figure as it walked ahead, its hooded form now shrouded in complete darkness, its features indistinct. But there was something captivating about it, something hypnotic in its presence. The closer he got, the more he felt the weight of its power pressing down on him. He wasn't sure what it was exactly, but there was a palpable force emanating from the figure, an energy that thrummed in the air around it. It felt like the very air was charged, like static electricity building up before a storm. And yet, the figure moved with an eerie calmness, as if it were completely in control of everything around it. It wasn't hurried. It wasn't anxious. It simply existed, as though it were part of this place, an integral force that had always been there. The fog swirled around him, thicker now, its tendrils creeping up his legs, almost as if it were alive, seeking to hold him back, to prevent him from continuing. The world around him seemed to narrow, the edges of his vision blurring as though reality itself was warping, bending under the weight of whatever forces were at work in this place. He tried to shake the feeling, tried to clear his mind, but it was impossible. The more he tried to resist, the stronger the pull became. His feet moved of their own accord, step by step, pushing him forward. The sounds of the forest, the rustling leaves, the distant howling wind, faded into the background, replaced by the pounding of his own heart in his ears. He was no longer sure if he was walking of his own free will or if something else, something far more powerful, was guiding his every move. Suddenly, the figure stopped. It was as though it had sensed his approach, like it knew exactly when he would reach it. The ground beneath them seemed to still, the air growing even colder, and for a moment, time seemed to stretch, suspended in a heavy silence. He stopped a few paces away, not daring to take another step closer. The figure remained still, its head lowered, obscured by the shadows of its hood. It seemed to be waiting for him to make the next move, but his body refused to obey. Every part of him screamed to run, to turn around and escape, but he couldn't move. It was as though his legs were locked in place, his mind caught in some invisible snare. The creature, this being, held him in its grip, its very presence paralyzing him. Then, without warning, the figure raised its hand. Slowly, almost delicately, it motioned for him to approach. The gesture was simple, but there was something unnerving about it, something that felt both inviting and threatening at the same time. He took a hesitant step forward, his feet moving almost against his will, the pull stronger than ever now. His mind screamed for him to stop, to turn away, but his body continued forward. The closer he got, the more intense the energy became, like a magnetic force drawing him in. He could feel it in the pit of his stomach, a tight, gnawing sensation that seemed to grow with every inch he closed between them. When he was close enough, the figure spoke, its voice soft and low, like a whisper carried on the wind. "You are not meant to be here," it said, the words lingering in the air, heavy with meaning. He froze, the words striking him like a blow to the chest. What did it mean by that? He wasn't meant to be here? But he didn't have time to process the thought before the figure continued. "The path you are on, it will lead to your end." The voice was calm, but there was a dark finality to it. His throat tightened, his mind racing. What was the figure talking about? He had no idea what was happening, what forces were at play, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was in too deep now. There was no turning back. His heart raced in his chest, and his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Why am I here?" he asked, his voice hoarse, trembling with fear. The figure didn't answer immediately. Instead, it took a step back, its form merging even more deeply with the surrounding darkness. The fog seemed to thicken around it, as though it were an extension of the figure itself, as though it were being drawn into the mist. For a long moment, the figure was still, its presence filling the space with a heavy sense of anticipation, and then it spoke again, its voice barely audible. "Because you sought what you should not have. And now you will face the consequences." The words hit him like a wave, crashing over him with an almost physical force. Consequences? What did that mean? He hadn't sought anything. He had been driving, following the road that led him here, lost in the night, only to find himself in this nightmare. But the figure's words held an undeniable weight, and he couldn't help but feel that he was somehow to blame for everything that had happened. The altar, the creature, this being before him, it was all connected. But how? The figure raised its hand once more, and as it did, the fog began to swirl around it, moving with purpose, almost as if it were alive. The atmosphere shifted again, the pressure building in the air. He felt his chest tighten, as though he were being compressed by some unseen force. His vision blurred, the world around him starting to tilt and warp, and for a brief moment he thought he might pass out. He couldn't breathe. His head spun with confusion and fear, the words of the figure echoing in his mind, growing louder, more urgent. "You have no choice," the figure said, its voice now carrying an eerie, almost prophetic tone. "You have already crossed the threshold. You will follow the path, or you will be consumed by it." He felt a sharp, stabbing pain in his chest as the words reverberated through him. What was the figure talking about? He couldn't comprehend it. His head was spinning, his vision narrowing to the dark figure before him. There was no escape from this place, no running from the forces that had drawn him here. The fog thickened, swirling around him, blocking out everything else. His mind was consumed by a single, overwhelming thought. He was trapped. The figure took a step back, its silhouette fading into the swirling fog, its voice becoming distant, almost inaudible. "Your fate is sealed." And with that, the figure vanished, leaving him alone in the suffocating fog, with nothing but the weight of its words pressing down on him, and the terrifying certainty that he had just entered a place from which there was no return. The fog pressed in around him, thick and suffocating, as if it were alive, curling around his limbs, pulling at his feet. He stood motionless, the figure now gone, swallowed by the mist as quickly as it had appeared. The stillness that followed was deafening. His heart thundered in his chest, each beat vibrating through his entire body. The words the figure had spoken still echoed in his ears, reverberating through his skull, making it impossible to shake them. "You are not meant to be here. The path you are on will lead to your end." The weight of those words hung over him like a dark cloud, threatening to crush him under their intensity. He had no idea what this place was, or how he had ended up here, but everything felt wrong. His hands trembled as he reached up to wipe the sweat from his forehead, only to find his skin cold, clammy, his fingers shaking uncontrollably. The chill in the air seemed to seep into his very bones, making him feel brittle, like he might shatter at any moment. His breath came in shallow gasps, and for a brief moment he considered collapsing right there on the ground. But he couldn't. He couldn't let himself break. Not now. Not with whatever was out there, whatever force had brought him here, still lurking in the shadows. A noise broke the silence. It was faint at first, a barely perceptible rustling, like leaves moving in the wind. But there was no wind. The air was still. He froze, every muscle in his body tensing, instinctively straining to catch the sound again. And there it was. A low thud, followed by another. His eyes darted to the darkness beyond the clearing, but he saw nothing, just the swirling mass of fog that seemed to be closing in on him, inch by inch. His pulse quickened, his breath catching in his throat. What was it? What was moving out there in the dark? The fog shifted, and for the briefest moment he saw a figure. Tall, broad-shouldered. Its outline was barely discernible, but there was something unmistakably human about it. His blood ran cold as the figure moved, slowly, deliberately, through the mist. He didn't wait to see more. He turned on his heels and began to run. His feet pounded against the earth, his breath coming in desperate, frantic gasps. He couldn't hear the figure, couldn't hear anything above the sound of his own heartbeat thudding in his ears. The fog whipped around him, blurring his vision, disorienting him, making it harder to see where he was going. His legs burned with the effort, but he couldn't stop. He couldn't let whatever was behind him catch up. His thoughts raced as he ran. What was that thing? Was it the same being, the one that had spoken to him, or something else entirely? Whatever it was following him, and the terror that gripped him was like nothing he had ever experienced. It was primal, instinctual, this desperate need to escape, to outrun the threat that loomed just behind him, just out of reach. But the fog was relentless. It swallowed everything. He couldn't see more than a few feet ahead, and every turn he made only seemed to lead him deeper into the maze of trees and shadows. The path, if there had ever been one, was long gone, replaced by an endless void of nothingness. He stumbled, his foot catching on something in the dark. He fell forward, his palms hitting the cold earth with a sickening crack. Pain shot through his hands and wrists, but he barely felt it. He didn't have time to feel pain. He had to get up, had to keep running. Figure, whatever it was still out there. He could feel its presence, could feel the way it was tracking him, moving through the fog with unnatural ease. He pushed himself up, the fear in his chest burning like a furnace, and forced himself to keep moving. His legs felt like jelly, his body threatening to give out with each step, but he couldn't stop. A sound. This time, it was unmistakable, a low, guttural growl, vibrating through the fog like a warning. He stopped dead in his tracks, his blood freezing in his veins. The growl came again, louder, closer. It was no longer just the figure in the distance. Something else was out there with him, something far more dangerous, far more primal. The air around him felt thick, suffocating, and his breath came in shallow gasps as his mind struggled to comprehend what was happening. The growl grew louder still, and this time, it was accompanied by the unmistakable sound of something large moving through the underbrush, crashing through the trees. He didn't need to look. He knew. Something was hunting him,